Well, hello and welcome to our science lesson for today. Thank you for signing on and getting ready to do some more science. So we've been learning a lot about what scientists do and how they do things. And today we're going to continue with that thought. And our essential question for today is, how do scientists collect and use data? Some people say data. I say data. However you would like to say it is fine. How do scientists collect and use data? And ask us a question here. Are the ladybugs on this tree identical to each other? Are they all the same? How would you investigate? Well, you're going to have to look closely at them, aren't you? And ladybugs are tiny, so you might need some special tools to look at a ladybug to see if it looks like another ladybug. So we're going to learn about some tools scientists use during this lesson too. If you have your science book, you should please follow along in your science book. You should be on page 27. If you need to pause the video now until you get to your science book and open it to page 27, you can. Okay, we're on page 28 now. We're going to start reading this lesson. Research is the key. Tiny insects fly and flash on a summer night. What kind of insects are they talking about, do you think? I bet fireflies or lightning bugs, what we call them, right? Are you curious about them? Do you wonder how to find out what they are and how they light up? Have you ever wondered that? I know what some of you boys have done. You've taken them apart to see what's inside them, haven't you? Well, that's kind of an investigation. You're kind of researching. Don't kill little lightning bugs. They're too pretty. Do some research. Often scientists ask themselves, what do other scientists know about this? To find out, they do research. When you research, you use reference materials and talk to experts to learn about what is known. So if you want to learn what scientists know about fireflies, you can do these things. You could use an encyclopedia. Boy, people don't use really encyclopedias up anymore. We might look it up on a website, but there are still encyclopedias you can use. You could read a book about fireflies. You could read science articles. You could visit a museum. You could email a scientist. You could visit science websites. These kinds of resources may have plenty of information about fireflies, but you'll still have questions they do not answer. That's when you conduct your own investigation. This here says natural history museums have insect collections as well as scientists who can answer questions about them. That's a big old maybe grasshopper there. Why do you think they made it so big? Well, they probably made it big so that we can see what a grasshopper would look like up close if we were its size. How could you make a tiny little grasshopper look bigger if you couldn't shrink down to their size? You'd need a tool, maybe a magnifying glass. You just saw bees flying in out of a hole in an old tree. You know it's not a good idea to get too close. So how could you find out what bees do inside a tree? What research resource would you go to first? Well, we would probably all go to different ones, but I would probably go to the internet first. That's where I look up most things I want to know. But that's not the only place. There's other places. Have you ever been to Bays Mountain Museum in Kingsport? I don't know if it's still there or not, or this attraction is still there or not, but used to in the building in Bays Mountain, they had a glass on the inside around a bee's nest on the outside. So you could actually look through the glass and see a bee's hive inside through the glass and see the bees busy working in there and the little baby bees and honey and all that stuff. So sometimes you can go to museums to find out about things like bees. Next page. Science tools. What comes to mind when you hear the word tools? Maybe like hammers and saws and screwdrivers like you see your dad or somebody in your family using. How about computers and calculators? They're tools, aren't you? You're using a computer at home to help you learn. Both of these are science tools. Scientists use all kinds of tools. Many turn the five senses into super senses. Tools enable scientists to see things that are far away, to smell faint odors, to hear quiet sounds, and to feel vibrations their bodies can't. Let's say you want to observe craters on the moon. A telescope, which makes faraway objects look closer, will turn your sense of sight into supervision. This is using a magnifying glass here. An ant looks larger in a magnifying box or with a hand lens. Next page. More tools. What if you're interested in studying tiny critters such as leafcutter ants? Take along a hand lens. Hand lenses make small objects look bigger. I always call it a magnifying glass, but this is calling it hand lenses. Is the ant crawling away too fast to see with a hand lens? Try gently placing the ant in a magnifying box. The top of the box has a lens in it. Wonder what the ant's bite marks look like? Place a tiny piece of cut leaf under a microscope. A microscope is a tool for looking at objects that cannot be seen with the eye alone. If you looked at an ant through that microscope, how do you think it would look? If you want to later, you can draw a picture of what an ant might look like under a microscope right here. Microscopes magnify objects more than hand lenses do. Measurement tools. What's the biggest bug in the world? How far can a grasshopper hop? How long can a butterfly fly? How do scientists find the exact answers? Scientists use measurement tools to make their observations more exact. Think about it this way. You and your friend watch two grasshoppers hop. Your friend says, this one jumped farther, but you think the other one jumped farther. To find out sure, you would need to measure. There are tools to measure length or distance, mass, force, volume, and temperature. Most scientists use metric units with these tools. For example, a pan balance, here it is at the bottom, is used to measure the mass with units called grams. We'd put the little gram stackers on one side and the object we want to measure the mass of on the other side on a pan balance. A spring scale is used to measure force in units called newtons. I think we'll have to turn to the next page to see the spring scale. There it is. Tape measure. I bet you've got a tape measure around your house somewhere. This tool is used to measure length in millimeters, centimeters, and meters. Now, we're not used to measuring things like that, are we? We're used to measuring in like inches. But in science, they use the metric system to measure things. So it's millimeters, centimeters, and meters. Here's that spring scale. How would that work? Well, you hang an object from the hook. As the spring stretches, the marker will show the size of the force in newtons. What could you measure with a spring scale? What would you measure? You could hang something from it here like, I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. It would have to be something that you could hang, wouldn't it? If you had a little basket hanging from here, maybe you could put things in the basket, but then the basket would have some kind of weight too, wouldn't it? Think about that. What kind of things would you be able to measure with a spring scale? Of course, we've all used a thermometer. Used to measure temperature, this tool has two sets of units, degrees Celsius and degrees Fahrenheit. We take people's temperature all the time right now to make sure they don't have a fever, don't we? And we're not going to do this right here. This tells you some things that you can do at home if you want to. You can use some tools that you have around the house like a ruler or if you want to measure maybe an insect's length. If you want to, if you had a spring scale, you could use that. But I bet you have maybe a scale of some kind at your house that you can stand on and tell how much you weigh. That's a tool. You might have a temperature gauge at your house. That's a tool you could use. Now, when we get the data from the instruments we use to measure, then we got to show what we got. You can record it and you can display it. You're crawling through a tropical jungle. A butterfly flutters by. Then another appears. How will you keep track of how many you see? A poster is one way to display data. And look at this boy. He's got a ladybug and he's got all the different parts. All right, let's go. Recording data. The bits of information you observe are called data. Some data are in the form of numbers. For example, the number of butterflies you see in an hour is a piece of data. Other data are in the form of descriptions. Examples include written notes, diagrams, audio recordings, and photographs. Only observations are data, so when you think, there are more butterflies here than in Canada, that's a guess, not data. It has to be something that you actually measured. Displaying data. The data you record as you investigate may be correct, but not easy to understand. Later, you can decide how to display the data. For example, you might use your scribbled notes from the jungle to draw a map showing where you saw each butterfly. You might compare the number of each kind of butterfly you found in a circle graph. You might use a bar graph to show the number of butterflies you saw each hour. Now, we saw on the last page, the little boy displayed his data. He looked at a ladybug, and he'd done some research to find out what all the parts of that butterfly is. And so then he displayed it as a scientist so that other scientists can find out what it is. Look who's behind me. It's Mr. Taylor. Say hi to Mr.
Hello,
Taylor,
everyone.
everybody.
We miss you. Hope you're doing well.
It's good to see Mr. Taylor here. He's getting a phone call while he's here.
Hello.
All right, let's move on to the next page using that data. So we've collected data with tools. We've displayed it. Now, how are we going to use that data? You see on the news that the number of honeybees in the United States is decreasing. What's happening to them? How do scientists use data to solve problems and share information? Drawing conclusions. You've recorded your data. You've displayed it in a way that's easy to understand. Your next step is to analyze or look for patterns in the data. You might identify a trend or a direction in the data over time. For example, you might conclude that the number of honeybees in your hometown has decreased by 30% in the last 5 years. What's next? Well, once you find out that and you find some data, you've got to communicate it. Have you noticed in every lesson we've done, communication has been in the lesson? It's an important part of science, isn't it? You have to tell what you've learned from your experiments and investigations. Scientists communicate in many ways. They may work together to collect data. They compare their data with other scientists doing similar investigations. They report their results and conclusions by giving talks and writing reports. Conclusions often lead to new questions to investigate. Scientists are still studying why the number of honeybees is decreasing. So here's a little caption down here. Scientists can share data as they make observations by using electronic devices. Electronic device like a text. So we see somebody just texted, and one scientist texted another scientist to tell him some information he had gathered. So text is a way to communicate. You and I are communicating right now. Google Classroom is a way to communicate. Your cell phone, your telephone. How else do we communicate? Well, we could write letters. Not many people write letters anymore, but you could write letters. You could write your girlfriend a note. I'm just kidding. But you got to communicate, right? There's lots of different ways we can communicate. Communication has changed a lot over the last few years. Scientists may work alone or in teams to analyze data and draw conclusions. Sometimes a scientist is working on a project by themselves. Sometimes they have a team working together. Museums often have large collections of specimens so scientists can compare what they have found to what's in a museum. Let's look at this. A database is a collection of information or objects. Databases are organized so they are easy to search like a search website. How do you search a database of insect facts to see what others have learned about the decrease in the number of honeybees? How would you do that? You could look it up on the internet, couldn't you? You could visit a place where they were studying insects. Okay. And that's the end of the lesson. So here is the page where you get to cheat each time. Page 38 in your science book. The answers are at the bottom. I do want you to fill it in. I know that I don't ever see this, but you'll be glad that it helped you review the lesson. So scientists do the research to find out what others know. Sources they can use. You could use an encyclopedia. Your answers are down here. Fill them in. We read about science tools. Tell about some more tools. Part 3 there. Pan balance, spring scale. What else? Recording and displaying data. How do you display it? Tables, blank, blank. You can copy down there. The next part, here's 8 vocabulary. I think it's 8, maybe more. It's 10. 10 vocabulary words that you need to unscramble in your book. This is just for practice and spelling them. Obviously, this first one, ta-da, is data, isn't it? D-A-T-A is what we would write in the blanks. D-A-T-A. What do you think this one is? I'm a superstar. Is that what that says? I don't think so. What is it? It's got two A's, an E, and an M. I don't know. Let's look down here. What word has two A's in it to begin? I don't know what that one is. Do you? It's all mixed up, but it's got two words. Spring scale, tape measure. Do you think it's tape measure? Oh, that's it, isn't it? They're all mixed up. So this doesn't make a word here. So it would be TAPEMEASURE. So write them in your book. Now, you're going to have a little activity where you're going to do like you have been doing. You're going to match these 10 words to what they mean. Please use your book, and you can make an easy 100 on that, okay? Before you go do that, let's look at this. Let's talk about this for a minute. Someone gives you an object, you think it's a rock, but you aren't sure. How could you use research? How could you use each of these to research what you've got? An encyclopedia? Well, maybe you could look up, try to find a picture of what it is, or look up types of rocks. In an encyclopedia, you would find an encyclopedia that covers the letter R if you're looking up rocks, or turn to the R section. Websites, you could type in types of rocks in the search bar if you wanted to do that. Books, you could go to the library and check out a book on rocks. You could contact a scientist, couldn't you? I know over in what's in Gray, Tennessee, at the Gray Fossil Site, where they've actually found dinosaur bones, they have a lot of rocks there. I bet there's a scientist at the Gray Fossil Site. It's also where the Hands-On Museum is. There's scientists there who can tell you about rocks. You might even have a fossil. A museum? Sure. You might go to a museum in Knoxville or somewhere bigger city where there's a museum of natural history or something, and you might get to talk to a scientist there that can tell you what you have. Let's just look at these right here. Draw lines to match the tool to its use. Well, let's see if we can figure out which one they are. A pan balance, what does that do? A pan balance measures mass. A spring scale, what does it do? Does it measure force? Measure force that something's pulling down on it? Maybe that's it. A thermometer to find temperature. A microscope, you would use that to look closely at, to view objects too small to be seen with the eye alone. And a hand lens you would use to look closely at insects outdoor. Why don't you match that? We'll go over it again. A pan balance, draw your line. A pan balance measures mass. A spring scale measures force. A thermometer measures temperature. A microscope, it views objects that you couldn't see with your eye alone. And a hand lens, you could look at insects outdoors with that closely. And that's the next lesson. So we finished today's lesson. I put a little video that you want to watch after this screen. Watch the little video and then go try to match your vocabulary for today.